Hello, I'm back again, and now we're going to talk about brushes. And we're going to talk about brushes for oil painting and brushes for acrylic painting. One of the things I want to talk to you about is when you use oil brushes, you can use synthetic or you can use natural bristles. And the reason you can use the natural bristles is because the oil medium itself is sort of conditions the brushes and softens the brushes. In years past, in the Renaissance, actually when painters would paint, they would actually leave their brushes in the oil medium, kind of hanging them in mid-air and letting them soak in there. We don't do that today. We clean them with a combination of oil, linseed oil or some type of oil medium, even canola oil, and we may use a type of cleaner that we buy that's specifically designed for cleaning brushes. Jack Richardson's is called Linseed Studio Soap. Anyway, the Linseed Studio Soap is excellent for conditioning and cleaning brushes, which is something you really want to make sure that the brushes are cleaned, especially way down into the furrow of the brush. And you want to make sure that they're nice and snug, because otherwise, if the dirt gets in between there, it'll just flay out. Well, we have different kinds of brushes, and I have dozens of brushes. I could have shown you this brush and that brush, and I have just piles of brushes I've collected over the years, but really you don't need it. I think it just happens that when you're painting, you just, oh, this is a cool brush, I want to get this brush. But for this project, you really only need a few brushes. And I like starting out with, this is a flat. Can you see the flat? Company 6. But it's easier for me to say, oh, this is about that size, and you can kind of see by looking at it what I'm talking about in terms of size. That is called a flat, and it's long. Now, if it's short, it's called a bright. I don't really care if you get a bright. This is another kind of brush. It's called a filbert. It's really a rounded flat, and it's not a complete round. It's basically flat, but it's become round at the top. And that's another type of brush that is very helpful for working. This is another one. It's a fan brush. And the size, they come in different sizes. They're for smoothing off surfaces lightly. Here we have another flat that's very tiny. You probably have it's very tiny compared to my finger. But it gives you a little more detail. The most important one that I'm interested in you basically looking at is this brush here. This is a liner brush, and the liner is used for detailing, and you don't really need that until the very end. But one of the things I wanted to talk about again is natural versus synthetic. With oil, you can use both, and it's very important that you always clean your brushes. And there was one other brush that I had that was 2 inches wide. This one here, this is my older one, but you can get this at a hardware store. It's great for just filling in large areas, and they're not very expensive. And that, I think that for sure you would want the bigger one. You'd want this one here. And you'll want the liner brush for sure. For sure these 3. And it would be nice if you had a smaller detail, but it's not that important. And this is not that important, the fan brush. Any questions, please leave the comments below. That's for oil brushes. Make sure to clean them. You can clean them with a combination of your own oil. You can use canola oil, and then you can use your solvent, which I will be talking about. I talked about a little bit earlier, and this any kind of soap cleaner. I sometimes even use Dawn dishwashing soap. But the thing is with Dawn dishwashing soap is that it's very strong and can really destroy the natural bristles. So you have to oil it up and make sure that you condition the brush. Sometimes I even use on my natural bristle brushes, I use hair conditioner to soften the brushes. So that's about the brushes for oil. Now for acrylic, the shape of the brushes are very similar, but in many ways you have to be, they're not as forgiving with acrylic. So I don't recommend natural bristle brushes for acrylic because oftentimes these brushes sit in the water while you're painting, because if you just leave them on the side out in the open air, the paint will dry in them while you're working, and then you'll wreck your brushes. So you keep them in the water. But the thing is, if you keep the brushes in the water, then that kind of, if it's natural, it kind of dries out the brushes and makes them brittle and really wrecks them. Whereas a synthetic brush will be able to withstand being in the water more. So I really recommend synthetic brushes when working with acrylic paint. And the same thing with the size. If I said a size 6, for example, that would not help you because one company's size 6 might be very different than another. But you can see, and I will show this to you, the size by looking at my hand. You can see that it's about the width of my hand. This is a filbert. It's basically a flat that's rounded out. This is a fan brush. And then we have, this is a complete round. It's a tiny little round. And then we have a flat. And of course, I always recommend for working on detail a liner. And it's not just a short liner. You want a longer liner because it holds more paint. If you're trying to paint a line or a branch on a tree or a windowsill and you need a long stroke, if you don't have a brush that's longer, with the bristles are longer, then what's going to happen is you're going to get a short distance and you're going to run out of paint, and it's going to be very difficult to get that long stroke. And I'll talk to you about how to stroke, because you don't use your hand, you use your whole arm, but we're not going to deal with that. Now, both the oil and the acrylic brushes need what I call, okay, a little further back there. These are palette knives, and they're great for mixing paint, lifting paint, so you can see them, and very helpful. I love using a palette knife. It doesn't get your, when you are mixing paint with a brush, you tend to push into the furrow of the brush, and then you end up getting more paint in that, and then that wrecks your brush. Whereas when you're mixing with a palette knife, you're not dealing with your brushes and wrecking them and all that stuff. So a palette knife, even if it's not this wide and you get a narrower one, that will work just great. I know that I could talk a whole bunch more about brushes, and in class I'll talk more about the brushes and all the things and the way you can use them. But for now, I think this will kind of give you a good idea what you need when you come to class and workshop. And I know that we're going to make two paintings in that weekend. So I'm looking forward to being with you and having some fun and learning how we're going to do this together. Bye.